Good evening. How you doing? Thanks for braving the snow to be out here. Thanks. Preparing to write this introduction, I got the pleasure not just of reading Richard Price's new novel, The Whites, but also went back and watched some of his cameos in the films and TV on which he worked. Richard Price has turned his talent for producing brilliantly cinematic novels into a second career writing with great success for movies and television, work which added an Oscar nomination and an Edgar Award to his honors, which include the National Book Award and an induction into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Serious fans of The Wire may remember Mr. Price appearing as an English teacher working with a prison group that included the doomed D'Angelo Barksdale, who reflects with prescient insight on Fitzgerald's Gatsby and the difficulty of second acts in American life. He shows up in The Color of Money, New York Stories, Freedom Land, Mad Dog and Glory, and several other projects. But my favorite Richard Price cameo is actually from Ron Howard's Ransom, for which Mr. Price co-wrote the screenplay. Mel Gibson and Rene Russo are in that, but for me, all the fun, the sharp dialogue, the edgy stuff is all with the cops and the criminals. Richard Price appears as Detective Number 1 and delivers my favorite line. When a suspect in handcuffs complains that they're too tight, Mr. Price's character cheerfully responds, "That's because they're new." They'll stretch. You got to give them some time. That's a cop joke, delivered wide-eyed, mock innocent, in a spirit that anyone who knows the work of Richard Price will instantly recognize. Michael Chabon in the New York Review of Books described a Richard Price character as half-assed, sharp-witted, a dreamer of vague and unremarkable dreams, filled with shame and remorse, too smart for his own good, too hampered by conscience and scruple to succeed at any of the things his world offers to him as a means to success. In 9 novels starting with The Wanderers in 1974, Richard Price has created unforgettable portraits not just of cops and criminals, but of all the characters, high and low, who occupy the very specific turf at the center of the action in books like Clockers and Lush Life and his newest, The Whites. Whether evoking a few square blocks of Lower Manhattan or building a complete fictional city in North Jersey, Richard Price creates a world entire. He has been compared to Melville, to Raymond Chandler, and to Saul Bellow. Not too many people have gotten all 3 of those comparisons. In the Washington Post review of The Whites, Patrick Anderson writes, "The real joy of the book lies page by page, line by line, in its brilliant characterizations, rich detail, endless surprises, crackling dialogue, absurdist humor, and panoramic portrait of endless crime breaking over the city like a tsunami." That's Richard Price. If you care about crime in Philadelphia, George Anastasia is irreplaceable. For nearly 40 years, Mr. Anastasia has been covering crime, both organized and not so much, for the Philadelphia Inquirer. In 6 books and countless articles and essays, TV shows and documentaries, he has been an indispensable guide to the underworld and the realities and complexities of modern crime. He's a New York Times bestseller, has won many awards for investigative journalism, twice been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, and won the coveted Sigma Delta Chi Award for magazine reporting. 60 Minutes calls George Anastasia one of the most respected crime reporters in the country. His book, Blood and Honor, was named the best gangster book ever written by Jimmy Breslin, and his latest, Gotti's Rules, is called a must-read and compelling, occasionally frightening, often surprising journey into the world of organized crime. Here then in conversation about Mr. Price's latest novel, The Whites, George Anastasia and Richard Price.
Thank you. Well, thank God for the weather, so everybody can have a seat. What I'd like to do is, there's a sensitive microphone, so tell me if I'm spitting or something. Is this okay from here? All right. Oh, shoot, my glasses. Thank God. Okay, so I'd like to do like a short reading, just a couple of minutes from The Whites, just to give you just a taste of. It's about a guy who's supervisor on Night Watch, which is a detective squad that's responsible for all the felony weight Manhattan from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. when there are no active detective squads in the local precincts, and they have to catch everything. And sometimes, it might be, a quintuple murder, Sometimes it's, somebody lost their Argyle sweater. And sometimes when the phone rings, it's somebody's wife saying, don't forget the milk and bananas. So here's a typical, Billy Graves is the main character. He's the supervisor of night watch and it's St. Patrick's night. He gets his first call, and it's a gang fight in Harlem. And it's a gang fight where everybody's using light bulbs. And you got 3 kids in the hospital with light shards, in their eyes. And he gets on the scene. The local gang squad is already, bundling everybody up, with plastic cuffs. Looks like they're bundling wheat. And there's nothing really for him to do. And then he gets a call from his dispatcher. They call the Wheel. The Wheel's job is to calls come in calling for night watch, and the Wheel's job is like the goalie on the hockey team. Well, I don't really think that's right for us, Sarge. Why don't you wait for the day squad to come in, see if there's any pattern there running down there, because there's really nothing for us to do. So his job is to make sure nobody has to go out all night long. And so he's just finished this gang fight job in Harlem, and he gets a call from the Wheel. Hey, boss, you remember the 72 Olympics? Not really. The Munich Massacre? Okay. We had a guy there help take the silver in the 4x4 relays, Horace Woody. Okay. Lives in Terry Towers in Chelsea. Okay. Patrol just called in. Somebody stole his medal. You want us to take it? Could wind up being a media thing, plus Mayo's just sitting at his desk drooling on his blotter again. Well, then have him head over to St. Luke's ER and babysit Moretti. Make sure he isn't boosting any scalpels. In the case of the purloined medallion, the gang sergeant peered at him over the head of a 13-year-old manacled money stacker. Hey, Billy, no sweat. We can take it from here. All right, send Stupak to meet me, Billy said into the phone. I'm heading over there now. Sounded like a whole lot of nothing, but he had never met an Olympian before. Terry Towers was a 12-story Mitchell-Lama semi-dump in the West 20s, one step up from a housing project, which meant a few less elevators chronically out of commission and hallway odors not quite as feral. Apartment 7G itself was small, stifling, and untidy, dinner dishes still on the dinette table at 2:45 in the morning. In the middle of the cramped living room, Horace Woody, deep into his 60s but DNA blessed with the physique of a lanky teenager, stood hands on hips in his boxers, the taut skin across his flat chest the color of a good camel hair coat. But his eyes were maraschinos, and his liquored breath was sweet enough to curl Billy's teeth. It's not like I don't have my suspicions as to who took the damn thing, Woody slurred, glaring at his girlfriend, Carla Garrett, who leaned against an old TV console covered with esoterically molded liqueur bottles and dog-eared photos in lucite frames. She was maybe half Woody's age, on the heavy side, with steady, realistic eyes. The droll, resigned twist of her mouth confirmed Billy's hunch about this one being a dummy of a run, at worst a slow-motion domestic. But he didn't really mind, fascinated as he was by the older man's uncanny youthfulness. Some people, Woody said, they just don't want you to have no life in your life. There was a light rapping at the front door. Then Alice Stupak, who was another detective, 5'3" but built like a bus, eased into the apartment, her chronic rosacea and brassy short bangs forever putting Billy in mind of a battle-scarred alcoholic Peter Pan. How's everybody doing tonight? She blared with cheery authority, then zeroing in on Woody. How about you, sir? You having a good evening? Woody reared back with narrow-eyed disapproval, a look Billy had seen Alice get before, mainly, but not exclusively, from their suddenly off-balance male customers. But as fearsome as she was for some to behold, Billy knew her to be chronically lovelorn, forever pining after this detective or fireman, that bartender or doorman, endlessly driven to despair that all these potential boyfriends automatically assumed she was a dyke. Ma'am, Stupak said, nodding to Woody's girlfriend, why are we here? Carla Garrett pushed off the console and started camel walking towards the back of the apartment, curling her finger for Billy to follow. The halo-lit bathroom was a little too close. Uncapped bottles and tubes of skin hair care products rimming both the sink and the tub, used towels drooping from every knob, rod, and rack, stray hairs in places that made Billy look away. As Woody's girlfriend began rooting inside a full and ripe laundry hamper, Billy's cell rang. Forget that. You got it in there? Woody barked from the hallway. I know you got it in there. Just go back and watch your TV. Stupak's voice coming through the closed door. When the girlfriend finally stood upright from the hamper, she held a silver medal in her hands, as big around as a coffee saucer. See, when Woody gets his drink on, he wants to pawn it and start a new life. He did it already a few times, and how much you think he got for it? A few grand, Billy said. $125. Can I hold it? Billy was disappointed in how light it was, but he felt a little buzz nonetheless. See, Horace is okay most of the time. I mean, I certainly been with worse. It's just when he gets his hand on that cherry Chiaffa, you know? The man has got an alcoholic sweet tooth like an infant. I mean, you could get a good bottle of $50 cognac or Johnny Walker Black, leave it on the table, he won't even crack the seal. Something tastes like a purple candy bar? Watch out. I want my damn medal back, Woody yelled from farther away in the apartment. Sir, what did I just say to you? Stupak's voice flattening from anger. Start a new life, the girlfriend muttered. All the pawn shops around here got me on speed dial for when it comes in. Hell, he wants to take off? I'll loan him the money, but this here is a piece of American history. Billy liked her. He just didn't understand why a woman this lucid didn't keep a cleaner house. So what do you want me to do? He asked. Nothing. I'm sorry they sent you. Usually some uniform guys from the precinct come up, mainly just because he was a famous athlete. We play where'd she hide it this time. But you're a detective, and I'm embarrassed they bothered you. When they opened the bathroom door, Woody was back in the living room, sprawled on the vinyl-covered couch, watching MTV with the sound off, his jellied eyes dimming into slits. Billy dropped the medal on his chest. Case solved. Thank you. That's it. To the left, right? I think you said go to the left.
Okay, thank you all for coming out. I just got some notes. What we're going to do is, Richard and I are going to have a little conversation here, and after about 10, 15 minutes, we're going to open it up to a Q&A. So hopefully you'll have some questions or some follow-ups to the things we talked about. The first thing, the area I want to go at, the New York Times, when they did a profile of Richard about a month ago, said Richard Price is a skilled literary ventriloquist with a pitch-perfect ear for deadbeat street slang and sardonic cop banter. I wanted to ask you, do you hear things differently than we do? Are you conscious of that? And because everything I've read about you, any of your writing, always talks about the dialogue and how exacting it is, how perfect it is. Are you conscious when you're listening? Do you hear things differently than I do or the folks here do? How's that play out?
I don't know if I do or not because I'm not anybody else.
Okay.
You know, how would I know? You know, I see blue like blue. How do you see it? I don't know. I just love human speech, and I just love how an individual, processes thoughts into words, and everybody does it slightly differently, and certain occupations and certain social classes and certain, all social classes, all occupations, they seem to have their own argot and their own patois and their own sardonicness, especially, street people and cops. I mean, I can listen to anybody whose job is on the street or spends most of their day on the street. I can listen to them till the cows come home. But I always use this example. I mean, it's, I'm saying this for the X number of times, but it's the best example I can think of. We've listened to George Bush for 8 years on television, and I think most people can do a creditable imitation of George Bush reading the St. Crispin's Day speech. We might, screw up the Elizabethan English, but we can imagine what George Bush would sound like. And it's just osmosis,
No, I think that's one of the characteristics of all your writing that comes across so clearly. Joyce Carol Oates, writing in the New Yorker about 2 weeks ago, talking about the Whites, said, "It is not finally a novel clearly delineating solutions, but a novel of conscience fraught with ambivalence and ambiguity." Revenge and justice seem to be the two issues that your characters are wrestling with here, and depending on your perspective, it is either revenge or justice that they're seeking and that they carry out. Is that something that you've encountered in the time you've been around police, and that whole dilemma of...
No, because I'm a writer, you know, and they're going to be on their best behavior, and we could be a bunch of guys, you know, sitting around getting hammered, just like I could be with a family in the projects, and we're all sitting around doing this, that, and the other. But there's a certain duality when you're around a writer. There's the way you behave. You know, no cop I know is so stupid, you know, as to talk about, you know, Heart of Darkness with me, you know, and his fantasies and his urges. You know, I say I'm a novelist. So, you know, people are more or less on their best behavior, and then they retire. And then we have a talk. But if somebody just says, I don't give a shit, I'm just going to kill that guy. You know, I'll find a time and a place. They might tell that to their best friend. If that, they ain't telling that to me.
That leads me to another thing I wanted to ask you about God and morality and the role it has in the universe you've created. And as I'm reading this book and some of your other books, I wonder, is that God and morality exist, or is just something that's created to kind of keep the dark side of the human condition in check? Do you have it?
That is a deep question. And it's raining out. I don't know. All I can say is I try to put my characters in situations in which there are no easy answers. And it's a little bit damned if you do and damned if you don't, and you pick the thing that seems to hurt the least. I have a character he's assuming that 4 of his longest comrades in the NYPD, who are all now retired except him, have killed on their own, have decided to go back and kill the perps that they couldn't nail, and everybody in the world knew they did it. And they each have personal tragedies in their lives. And one guy just tips over the edge, the personal tragedy he's dealing with, and he acts out. And then the others have been tormented by these guys. Can you take the law in your own hands? No, of course not. But it's more, and they didn't do it for justice. It was pure, like, this guy has been tormenting me since I walked into that apartment where there were 3 dead young women.
Right.
And he's been going like this to me. He's on the he's got a job. Not only has he remarried and had 2 more new kids, but he got a promotion at the security guard company that he works. And I'm dealing with this, and this guy's having babies and going to a Yankees game, and I'm losing my son. It's just, you know, it's not justice. I mean, they can philosophize about it. It's just, I think they go black and they go reactive. But what they did is not as interesting to me because it's something I created as a dilemma for this cop that's still on a job. These guys have all saved his life over the 25 years. When their families were falling apart, he took in their kids. When his family was falling apart, they took in his kids. I mean, they're closer than close. And now he's found out they might be murderers. Does he blow the whistle on them? Does he start an investigation with them? These are the worst guys in the world they're going after. What does he do? And, you know, there isn't any right answer, but it's his struggle with coming to a decision which is the force that drives the book.
Right, and I like the way that you also wove in his wife has her own set of issues.
Yeah.
And at one point in the book, she says to him, Jesus, Billy, everybody needs to be forgiven. He doesn't know it at the time, but she's, in essence, talking about herself.
She's done something that she considers worse than any of them.
Right.
And it's been dogging their marriage. He has no idea why his wife goes into such black dog moods and can't get out of the bedroom for 3 days at a time. And, she has a confession too. But he's got a confession. Everybody's done something. And at what point do you say, do you walk away, or what point do you feel like it's impossible to walk away from this?
Well, I think one of the things, again, that comes across is life is messy. And I think you're a master at portraying life as messy. And these are people trying to deal with the various messiness in their life.
Well, listen, if life wasn't messy, there'd be no call for fiction writers. Right. I mean, what else are we going to write about? You know, happy all the time?
Let's return to the issue of God. And there's a great line where one of the retired detectives, his teenage son is dying of cancer. And
spoiler alert.
Right.
Right. No, I blew that one too. Yeah.
And he delivers a eulogy where he basically goes on a rant about God. And
yeah.
it put me in mind of, I mean, the classic Albert Camus, how can there be a God when innocent people suffer? Is that one of the things we're dealing with here? Is there a God? Is that?
Well, I feel like one of the things the book is about is when people get to the point in their lives when they feel there is no God, and they make the terrible mistake of saying, therefore, I got to step in and be God just for a day. Mm-hmm. Horrible things happen. So, you know, whether there's a God or not a God, whatever, but just the idea of people feel that there is a God keeps them in check.
And can we extrapolate and apply that to the politics and government and what's going on in the world today?
You need another writer up here. You know. You know, it's not my table.
Okay. There was another profile of you in today's Inquirer. My former colleague, Turdad Dirkshani, wrote, Richard Price uses crime the same as Dostoevsky and Dickens, as an entree, an angle, a doorway into social reality to be analyzed, dissected, and appraised. Crime is the driving force in a lot of things you've written.
Yeah, but the thing is, I don't write about crime because crime is sexy. You know, like, oh man, it's murder. How can you get any better than that? I write about crime because I need something to organize myself, going through a landscape. You know, and I found that if there's a crime that's indicative of all the underlying tensions in a place, a city, follow the investigation, and it'll bring you all the people in that disparate community. For example, usually when I write a book, I'm attracted to an area, or I'm attracted to a certain conflict. For example, I wanted to write about the crack epidemic when I wrote Clockers. And I needed to learn more about, you know, crack making, crack policing, crack merchandising, and, you know, the kids that were out there on selling it. And I really wanted to start in the Bronx, where I'm from, but, the bureaucracy of the NYPD, I made the mistake of going through channels, you know, so forget that. And then I ran into a homicide detective in Jersey City, and he said, come on over. You know, Jersey City, if the cops like you, and they know you're doing a book about a homicide, they'll kill somebody for you, so you can see how they process the scene. You know, it's like, hey, Rich, what do you need? You know, it's time for the heart medicine. We're going to McNulty's or McNeely's? You know, it's like, yeah, what about this guy? You just killed him. It's okay, don't worry about it. We'll put a tent over him. We need heart medicine, you know, just a couple of shots. Anyway, I'm hopefully exaggerating. Anyways, and I needed an entree into an arena. Like, I couldn't get the Bronx. Well, guess what? I found Jersey City. So I just wanted to run with people. And so I went out with this group of people and that group of people. And what I wanted to write about got bigger and bigger. And I just spent a year there just absorbing all elements that would go into this giant Clockers ball. But I didn't have a central story. Then one night, some kid that was a manager of a McDonald's came in because he shot somebody in his parking lot. And he came in, he was a black kid, and he came in with a black minister, a black congressman, and a black retired police captain. And they look at his record. He doesn't have a record. He's a hardworking kid. Why the hell did he shoot this guy? It didn't even sound real. So just to make sure they had the right guy, because when you arrest somebody and you want to prosecute them, the first question a prosecutor is going to ask you is, how am I going to lose this? You know, so you better have, because they're not going to go to court with anything that they might lose. So just to be safe, the cop that made the arrest, the homicide cop, he wanted to go back and interview the parents of this kid who came in, this good guy. So I went with him as he went back to the house. He goes into this, cheap housing development. The parents are there, they're watching Dynasty. And he goes, and first of all, he wants a photo of the kid, not a mugshot, like in cap and gown. Because he's going to show that photo around. And if he shows it to his friends and he's behind bars already, they're going to go, I don't know anything. So he's there and he's asking him, gee, this kid's never been in any trouble before. Why? They're watching Crystal and, Who Shot JR. And, they're hardly, he's going, that's weird. This kid's never been in trouble. And now he's arrested for murder. He's going, And then he sees on the etage, the tchotchke shelf, there's a picture of the kid in cap and gown. He's like, he wants that. And he says, I just feel like something went terribly wrong, and I want to help this kid, which, of course, everybody goes, yeah, I believe you. And can I just have this high school graduation picture here? Because I think in that picture, he really looks like the good guy I know that he really is. And the father turns around and goes, that ain't Darryl. That's his brother, Roland. And he goes, Roland, man, they look like, yeah, they're twins. Ka-doing, And he goes back, and he finds that Roland's got a sheet, long enough to write on the road, in one Benzedrine burst. And it turns out that the kid who shot the kid really shot the kid, and he was as bad as his brother. He just never got caught before, and he was smart enough to go in with this whole political thing. But in my mind, I've been wandering around Clockersville, trying to find the core of my story. I want to write about Jersey City. I want to write about cops and kids. I want to write about drugs. I want to write about the housing project. But I got myself the wrong brother. It's like Dickens. I just felt like, the story comes last, and it's a crime that reveals something that just is a stand-in for everything that's fascinating to me and everything that I want to essentialize about a subject.
In the current
novel. That was a
novel,
long answer, wasn't it?
No. That's the current novel, The Whites. Talk about the title, what it means, and how did you come to that as the driving force for?
Well, people, by reflex, a lot of people think it's a racial reference, right? Because mostly because of what I write about, and it's not. Since 1986, I've been hanging out in detective squads for this project or other. And in every squad, there's a guy who's obsessed with one case of all the cases he's had. And it's a case that gets him so deeply that even though he's up to his hips in blood in this precinct, it's Washington Heights during the Dominican cocaine wars. And it's a case where 2 yeshiva students were shot in a car by a sniper. He's haunted by this case. He opens a closet and bodies come out like Fibber McGee's closet. And that's his case. Another cop I've met will have a case that involved, an old person. And that's his case. And and this person has a case that involves this, and they will take these cases into retirement with them. And they're like Ahabs.
Right.
And this case is their white. And the perp, if they know them, is the great white. And that's where the title comes from.
Last question, and then we'll go to the audience. And that's, I know that this is one that you've heard before, but in both the New York Times piece and in today's Inquirer, I got the sense that you were saying you almost wrote this book in spite of yourself, that you wanted it to be a page-turner, a quickie, police procedural, and it turned into another Richard Price novel, which is not a very bad thing at all, but I mean, for all of us, it's great that it did.
Another goddamn Richard Price.
Is this the last time we're going to see Billy Graves? Is this the last we're going to hear from Harry Brant?
No, but this is the last you're going to hear my pen name.
Okay.
All right. I just felt like in the beginning, the idea was to write. You know, there was a move where a lot of writers were taking on pen names to write quick, like you know.
Ed McBain is an example of that, right? Ed McBain, the 87th
Yeah.
precinct. It's Evan Hunter.
Yeah, who wrote Blackboard Jungle.
Right,
And I
right.
know why his name was Evan Hunter, because my father worked with Evan Hunter's father, you know, for a
Right.
while. They were cab drivers. Evan Hunter's name was his pen name because he went to Evander High School in the Bronx, and then he went to Hunter College, so he's Evan Hunter. But, you know, he was an Italian. His real name was...
Salomino.
No, am I thinking...
No, you're right. I was going to throw that out to the audience, a trivia question.
Oh, yeah.
Evan Hunter's real name is Salvatore Lombino.
Did you know? Wait, don't tell me. What was the question? Oh, yeah. So, I picked a pen name because I really felt like I had so much memory. I had such a storehouse of incident and memory, and had osmosed so much of life on the streets that I just wanted to write a pure, straight-up what happens next thriller. You know, create, you know, good enough characters and just do a page-turner and just whap it out. But I couldn't, you know. I thought, you know, best laid plans, but it turned out, you know, 4-year job, just like any other book, and it kept expanding. I thought I was writing about a crime thriller, but I started writing about, because of my own domestic happiness for once, I started really getting into a happy family, which is like insane, you know. And it's not a family without problems, but it was two people and that felt like all they wanted was each other, but not in a way of like Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald or anything. Whatever shit came down on their head, they had each other, and they never gave it a second thought. You know, what it would be like to not have each other, because it's unthinkable. And so I started writing about family life as much as a crime. And the news for me is writing about family, not writing about a crime. But it just turned into a big, fat 4-year, you know, oh, Christ, here we go again, book.
Well, I've read it. Any of you have read it. I think we're thankful you took the time and the effort, because it's another great Richard Price novel. Let's open this to the audience. Please wait till the microphone comes and ask your question, and then Richard will be happy to answer it. Right down here. Front row right here.
Yes, Richard, in the New York Times book review, you were quoted an article on you. Do you really read all those books all the time, or do you have plenty of time to, like, make out the list?
Oh, that by the book list?
Yeah.
Well, I have all those books. It doesn't mean I read them. No, listen, I think a lot of people, when they hit that question, they go, all right, I'm going to just really impress the shit out of people. But truth of the matter is, I did read about 3/4 of those books, and there's 1 or 2 books, like Elaine Pagel's Revelations, that I started and I didn't quite finish. The William Carlos Williams novel, White Mule. You know, I got a couple of chapters into and respectfully set it aside. But it was pretty honest.
But in that article, you said something very interesting to me, and that was that you learned from Lenny Bruce the art of the riff, that you identified at the time as being your own nascent writing style. And I wonder if you could give an example of that, or how it manifests. And I'm suspecting that it manifests sometimes in long, kind of serpentine sentences that
exactly.
are interesting to me. And
well, what I liked about Lenny Bruce, and I think every college boy tries to impress a girl by either doing a Lenny Bruce monologue or strumming terribly a Bob Dylan song, like they never heard of Bob Dylan. And this, you know, Mr. Sensitive, you know, so he can nail somebody. But, you know, I never did that. Sorry. Ouch. Is my nose going? Oh, no, I haven't. But I love social realism. I love these big, concrete books like Man-Child in the Promised Land, Native Son, Richard Wright's Native Son, the Studs Lonigan trilogy, because they were about streets and cement, not the countryside. or, you know, the planes, you know, and I love them, but I felt there was something earnest about them. There was something unlight about them. I felt like they were on a mission, all those books. They're trying to prove a point. So I didn't particularly want to write like that. Then I heard Lenny Bruce's routines, and it was studded with metaphors and similes. You know, especially, I don't know, I don't want to recite Lenny Bruce, I'll screw it up. But, you know, this Lima, Ohio routine where he's talking about the house and, you know, what it looks like. You know, and the chick comes in, she looks like a hockey stick with hair, and they show you the laundry and how they fold the linens, and the other people were so filthy, and blah, blah. You know, and he just goes on, and it was just like this free associative, just plucking dead-on metaphors and similes out of the air, and it was kind of my sense of humor, except I wasn't as sophisticated. I was a kid, you know, and there's something about that riffy style that could lighten up social realism for me. And then along came Last Exit to Brooklyn, where Hubert Selby just went stone bebop on the most awful urban realities. And then I heard Lord Buckley, you know, who's probably lesser known than anybody here, who's basically a verbal scat singer. And he did these freestyling monologues about Mahatma Gandhi, the hip Gan, and Jesus of Nazareth, the carpenter kitty from Nazareth, you know, and he just had these long, crazy, inventive monologues, and all these things just loosened me up, you know, and I found a way to do my beloved quote-unquote social realism and make it sing. So there are voices out there that really were important to me just to bust up the earnestness.
Right out here in the front.
Can you share with us who Carl Brandt was and how you came to Harry?
Absolutely. Carl Brandt, you said, so you know, Harry Brandt was the name, but you just said Carl Brandt, so you know who the last name was about. When I was 22, and I was in my first year as a writing student at Columbia, I started writing just for my class an assignment, which turned out to be the first chapter of my first book, The Wanderers. And I handwrote it on spiral notebook pages. I didn't even have a typewriter. And I showed it to the guy that was running the program. His name was Frank McShane, who had written biographies of Raymond Chandler and James Cain. And he showed it to his agent, Carl Brandt. And the guy took the handwritten pages, and it must have been about 20, you know, lined pages, and he read it. And he said, I'm your agent, and when you're ready, we're going to publish this on 20 pages. And he did, and it all came true. And he was so unlike my own family. He was like 6'5". He was very squared away, you know, Central Park South upbringing, Manhattan swilling, martini swilling parents. And he was like my WASP dream father. And I was his adopted Jewish son. And I babysat for his kids. I would spend weekends in his house. When I was really strapped for a writing place, he gave me an office, in his suite of offices to write. Unfortunately, all he did in there was coke. And call writers out of the blue saying, I love your work, man. And when I called Hubert Selby, he's an old junkie, and, you know, he said, hey, Richie, you sound kind of funny there. I said, yeah. I said, I have sinusitis. And he's like, oh, is that what they're calling it these days? You know, and this is just more. Anyways, Carl Brandt just adopted me, and I adopted Carl. And we parted ways right before Clockers, but it was 18 years. And he passed away 2 years ago, and I just wanted to give him a little shout out. And Harry is just like a name. You know, like guys, kids aren't named Harry unless they're like, you know, British royalty anymore, but it was a very common name when I was a kid.
In the back there.
Could you give your slant on the current relationship between the mayor of New York and the rank and file of the NYPD?
Well, I mean, my opinion is worth no more than anybody else's opinion, and all I know about what's going on is what I read in the papers, like anybody else. I think Patrick Lynch, the head of the Patrolmen's Union, I think he was grandstanding. I think de Blasio was being a little insufferable. And I think it was a political pissing match between two guys, you know, trying to hold on to power. I also think police, when they're dissed or when they're criticized, tend to close ranks. When they feel threatened, you know, they're like any other social herd. They'll close ranks, horns out. And I think Lynch was able to use that. And what I find very interesting is the tabloids and their treatment of the Lynch-de Blasio war, because they hated de Blasio because he was a half lesbian or something. And you know, a commie simp and, you know, a Sandinista in his spare time. And he's basically trying to hold on to his ideals and principles, and now he's in politics. Good luck to you, laddie. Anyways, and so they jumped on Lynch's bandwagon when Lynch was, you know, cursing out, well, you owe us an apology, you know, we have a mayor, blah, blah, blah. You know, because the tabloids hated him. And they go, yeah. But then the tide turned, and the mood, the public opinion turned, and everybody was thinking like, you know, it's overkill with this, you know, police disrespecting the mayor. And the same papers that the headlines were, you go, Pat. The next day, shut your mouth, Pat. I mean, it's heartless, you know, and it's media driven. And, you know, there are deeper issues. There are deeper psychological issues between the us versus them, you know, mentality of a lot of police and the reality of the us versus them in their workaday life. But, you know, I just mainly responded to the typical amorality and exploitativeness of a newspaper with an agenda.
Okay, down here, in the front.
Welcome to Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Having my own personal Rollo Tomasi, for those who saw L.A. Confidential, I was wondering about, like, the police that you've dealt with in your career, more or less the wild geese. Now, you talk about how they obsess over knowing who the perp was in a particular crime. Mm. What about in the case of the whodunits, when they don't really know who did something?
It depends, you know, listen, it depends what the crime is. And, you know, honestly, in a lot of cases, you know, if it's in a poor neighborhood, they don't work as hard. You know, some cops do, but some cops don't. And especially, you know, during an era like the crack era, you know, they'll have pretty callous attitudes, self-cleaning oven. You know, today's victim is tomorrow's perp. You know, let them take each other out. The gangs are shooting each other, good. Just try not to do it in a basketball court with kids around. And some crimes, if it's tabloid fodder, they'll go after it. Some cops, it's so personal. I mean, some cops, like this book Ghetto Side, talks about this one white Irish cop in Watts who treats every young black man like the death of an important public figure, and he treats every homicide. It's like somebody shot Lady Gaga. You know, and you know, it's a great portrait of a community and crime and murder, and it just depends. You know, I mean, my wife Lorraine Adams won a Pulitzer for investigating civil rights abuses by Texas sheriffs, and it was, for some of these guys, it was a game to them. You know, they didn't give a shit. You know, it really depends on the individual, but it also depends on the priority system. If it's a high crime area and it's poor marginal people, especially people with a police record, self-cleaning oven. You know, and then one case gets under your skin, or it's a precinct that doesn't quite feel like that, accepts all victims equally, it's another story. But I don't think there's a hard, straight answer to that. It's very human and very subjective, and sometimes it's very inhuman.
Down the back there.
When you were describing your story about driving around in Jersey City before you found your crime with the brothers, were you still writing at night, or did you wait until that brother moment before you started writing?
Listen, I was taking notes to myself every time I went out the door of my house. You know, whether I looked at the notes, you know, later on I'm not sure if I did very much. But I was constantly absorbing details of a world. I just needed something to put this world in order for me. But by the time I found the crime, I knew that world very well, and I always looked for the small things. You know, the cops would say, why did you write about this, you know, 2-bit crack dealer in this big book? You saw us, you know, we just intercepted 50 kilos of heroin. Why don't you write about that? Because that's a newspaper story. That's a headline. What I'm writing about is the intimacy of lives. And, you know, God is in the details. And so I pay attention to the details. How's that for a God answer?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
That's a good God reference. Absolutely. Down the front here.
Just quickly, this speaks to your writing for movies and TV. I copied something that was once a quote attributed to you, that an artist doesn't have much choice when he's a hired pen, and so people may screw with what you do. This morning's article in the Inquirer notes there may already be a movie adaptation in the works for the whites. Does that give you pause for concern?
No, because I'm writing it and I'm getting paid. You know, I mean, the whole point is, I need to make money. Everybody needs to make money. Novelists cannot live off their royalties unless they're like super brand names. The way I make money is I'm fortunate enough to make a lot of money writing creatively, as much as they let me write creatively, TV and film work. And in the beginning, I was all pissed off and arrogant about, you know, these morons, these jerks. But it's, look, my attitude is, yeah, I'm a hired pen. What they want is what their marketing people want, because it's a huge investment. It's an $80 million investment, a movie at the least. And I can't write whatever I want. You know, they bought the book. They own the book. They hired me, and I didn't have to take the job. But I did, and I know the way the game's played. And as long as I can write novels, I'll do what I have to do. Listen, you're a carpenter. You come into a house, you want to do your carpenter thing, but the people, you know, want some kind of weird, funky bookcase that makes you vomit. Well, you're going to take the job. Do you need the money? You know, you do the best you can, but you don't have your choice. You're hired. And you can always say, I don't want the job.
We got time for one more question, but before that, I just want to read 3 short little lines that the kind of stuff that sticks with me when I read a book. And this is Richard writing about different people. He describes a detective, the Detective Feely, his tie unknotted and dangling like Sinatra at last call. Writing about a woman in the book, calling Stacy nervous was like calling water wet. And then the description of an apartment house. At this hour, the food odors of 3 continents crept down the elevator shaft like a fog. I mean, that's writing. We got time for one more question, and then right back there, the fellow right there.
First off, you know, thank you very much for what you do, and obviously for spending the time here. I was wondering, you sort of touched on it a little bit in terms of your process, but I wanted to hear maybe a little bit more between when you thought you were going to sort of tackle a page-turning type of. Did you approach your process differently too? Did you go into it saying I'm gonna outline differently, or I'm gonna approach the story in a different way than I typically actually write?
Here's what happens. I wanted to write about somebody that's in a jam, like their friends, the moral jam. And you have all these thoughts before you write. You have all this elaborate outline. You have these characters. You have your setting. You have everything. But the minute you start to actually write, all bets are off. The best, it's, once you start to write, you start breathing and living these characters that you thought you were going to do quickety quick. And all of a sudden, you want to give them more life and more life and more life. And the more life you give them, the more complexity the story has. The more complexity the story has, the more everybody needs more life, and the more rich the book gets. And the next thing you know, you're doing a 4-year quickie. And there's a big difference between planning a book and being in the physical act of writing. I mean, it's like an actor. We're talking, oh, yeah, I really wanted to play Napoleon. And here's how I'm going to do it. And then all of a sudden, he puts on his Napoleon coat, and he starts reading the lines. And this is why you always got to pay attention to an actor, no matter what kind of pain in the ass they might be. Because they're living your character. You're writing your character, but they're actually slipped on the skin of the character, and they're inhabiting that character. So when they say to you after a while, I don't think Napoleon would do that. You kind of have to listen before you say, just please take him away. Because he is Napoleon. He is the guy that's going to be Napoleon on the screen. And he's feeling this character in a certain way, and that's not to be dismissed. So that's a little bit like when I start writing, I start living in the skin of these hypothetical characters, and they lose their hypotheticalness, and all bets are off.
Richard, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. You're welcome.